The year is 536, and across the whole of the known world, the sun has gone dark. Not for an hour, not for a day, but for 18 long months of cold, unbroken, unnatural twilight. Across distant civilizations, people looked up at the same dying sun and struggled to record it. The sun gave its light without brightness, like the moon, as if it were sick. This was the beginning of what some historians have called the worst period in history to be alive. And for nearly 15 centuries, no one knew what had darkened the sun, or where the horror began. Let us begin where the record is clearest, with a man who saw it with his own eyes. His name was Procopius, a historian living in Constantinople, the greatest city in all of Europe. 500,000 souls lived there, a city of marble and gold, and above it all now hung a sun that had died. He wrote that the sun shed its beams without brightness, exactly like an eclipse that would not end. And from that time onward, he wrote, men were free neither from war, nor from plague, nor from sudden death. In Italy, another official was trying to govern through the darkness. His name was Cassiodorus. He asked how strange it was to see the sun lose its brightness and the full moon shorn of its glory. So he did the only thing a Roman official could. He told the people to store their grain and prepare. In Ireland, monks recorded a failure of bread. In China, stars were seen in the middle of the day. In Mesopotamia, it snowed in the middle of August. From Europe to Asia, one catastrophe, one dying sky. For centuries, no one could explain it. The ancient accounts were dismissed as exaggeration. The same descriptions in chronicles thousands of miles apart. Surely, they thought, just a myth. Then, in the 1980s, scientists began drilling deep into the ancient ice of Greenland. Each layer of that ice is a single year of snowfall, a frozen calendar, thousands of years deep. And in the chemistry of the ice from 536, they found it. An enormous spike of volcanic sulfate. The sulfate spike was enormous. Whatever had erupted had altered the sky on a hemispheric scale. And yet, there was no record of the volcano. No eruption anyone had seen. No mountain. Nothing. When a volcano this size erupts, it hurls sulfur high into the stratosphere, above the weather. There, the sulfur becomes a veil of tiny particles that reflects the sunlight back into space. The planet cools, the crops fail. And if the veil is thick enough, the darkness lasts for years. But 536 was not a single eruption. It was only the first of 3 of them. 2 more massive eruptions followed, around 540 and 547. No time to recover. This was not a bad year. This was a decade of volcanic winter across much of the northern hemisphere. Across Europe, temperatures fell by up to 2.5 degrees. It does not sound like much, but it was enough to devastate harvests across wide regions, and soon after, the people who depended on them. Hunger scattered communities and hollowed out the survivors, leaving fragile societies under crushing strain. The bacterium had existed for centuries. Now, displacement, trade, and crowded routes gave it new paths to spread. Then, in 541, plague reached Constantinople and tore through the crowded imperial capital. At its height, Procopius claimed, it was killing 10,000 people every single day. The Emperor Justinian himself caught the plague. He survived, but his dream of a reborn Rome did not. As the dark sky hung above, his armies entered Rome. Then plague drained his soldiers and his gold. Some estimates place the toll in the tens of millions, though the true number is fiercely debated. The roads Rome built to unite an empire now carried the epidemic swiftly from city to city. But Europe was not alone in its suffering. On the far side of the planet, other worlds were dying too. In coastal Peru, the Moche had flourished for centuries. Then their fragile world began to break. Their canals ran dry. Their fields turned to sand. Their painted temples emptied and fell silent. In China, the crisis of the 6th century deepened a chaos that was already tearing the empire apart. Drought, then flood, then famine. Starving peasants rose in revolt. The land fractured into war. And in distant Mexico, the single greatest city in all the Americas was about to meet its violent end. Teotihuacan, the city of the gods. 100,000 people. Pyramids among the largest on Earth. Tree rings show a long, punishing drought gripped central Mexico through the same troubled century. And in that same century, the city's sacred heart burned. The destruction seems to have come from within. Perhaps hunger and failure turned the people against rulers who had promised the favor of the gods. Volcanoes no one ever saw may have pushed societies on 3 continents closer to their collapse. And far to the frozen north, the catastrophe left a different kind of scar. Not in stone, but in memory. In Norway and Sweden, some researchers believe up to half the population may have vanished. Farms fell empty. Burial grounds went silent. And the people did something born of pure desperation. They buried their gold deep in the earth, hoard after hoard, perhaps desperate offerings for the sun's return. The sun had failed. The harvests had failed. To them, it was not weather. It was the end of the world, and they remembered it. In stories passed down for 1,000 winters, they called it Fimbulwinter. 3 winters with no summer between them. A darkness that heralds the death of the gods. Ragnarok. The scholars who study this now suspect the myth is a memory, a real catastrophe frozen into legend. For decades, one single question haunted the scientists. If a volcano did all of this, then where was it? It was a crime of global scale, with no crime scene. A killer that had left no name behind. Krakatoa was tested, but the dates did not fit. Rabaul was tested, but the chemistry came back wrong. Ilopango in El Salvador was the leading suspect, until its eruption was dated a full century too early. Then, high in the Swiss Alps, on a glacier called Colle Gnifetti, a new clue was hiding in the ice. This single core of ice held 2,000 years of Earth's history, layer by frozen layer, in fine detail. And in the ice layer for 536, they found tiny, razor-sharp shards of volcanic glass. Their chemistry was a clue, and one major analysis pointed toward a single place on Earth: Iceland. But even the Iceland link is disputed. Which volcano erupted and where? remains an open case. Somewhere beneath a still unidentified volcano lies the greatest crime scene in all of climate history. The very same ice held one more secret. A record, not of the sky above, but of the economy far below. Lead from smelting silver. Before 536, the levels were high. Mines worked, silver moved, trade breathed. Then the lead signal collapsed. Western European silver production stayed unusually quiet for generations. The tree rings tell the same story. The coldest northern hemisphere decade in over 2,000 years. Across much of the north, the climate did not recover until around 550. Years lost to the dark. But recovery did come. A century later, the lead returned, and with it, a new medieval world. The ice recorded the death of a world. And, buried in the same frozen pages, its slow rebirth. The story of 536 quietly changes the way we understand history itself. We tell it as a tale of kings and battles. But the greatest force was never human at all. Sometimes eruptions no ruler ever sees can shake societies across the world without an army crossing a border. And here is the thought that should keep us awake at night. Volcanoes capable of this are still with us. Eruptions strong enough to darken skies across continents are rare, but they return again and again. Tambora in 1815 showed what even one such eruption can do to harvests across the world. If it happened today, our connected world would face vulnerabilities our ancestors never even knew. A dark year across several major breadbaskets, and those shelves could empty within just weeks. It is not a question of if it happens again, only when, and whether we will be readier than they were. 15 centuries ago, Procopius laid down his quill and never learned why the sun had died. He looked up at a darkened sky and could read it only as a terrible portent. He had no other answer. It took us 1,400 years and ancient chemistry locked in alpine ice to begin to answer him. In a stretch of ice a few centimeters thick lies the record of 3 eruptions and a decade of death. The ice remembers precisely what Procopius never could explain, and it is still trying to warn us today. The past is never as distant as we think. Sometimes the oldest warnings are the ones we most need. If you want more of the stories that history forgot, subscribe here to Echoes of Antiquity.